From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to a brand new season at Crockett's Victory Garden. I want to explain some of the confusion that might be in your mind from weather that you've seen on some recent programs. Actually, those programs that you watched this winter were done a year ago. That explains why I might be out here in my shirt sleeves in the garden, and you know very well that it was snowing that day. Well, today, the first day of this year's programs, the most important thing I want to talk to you about is soil preparation. Today also we're going to plant some cabbages and some lettuce seedlings. We're going to plant some peas and carrots and beets and Swiss chard, radishes and spinach. But first, I want to talk to you about this lawn care business, because if your lawn is like mine and most lawns in the northern part of the country, we've been through a very tough winter. The lawns have, some of them have suffered rather badly. The first thing that you want to do is to just get up all of this debris, save it for your compost pile. That'll make good fertilizer for your garden later on. We'll rake up your garden, your lawn, and then we will feed it. And we will also adjust what is called the acidity-alkalinity balance. I'm going to talk about that for just a minute, because that affects your vegetable garden as well as your lawn. Now, if you live in the central part of the United States, which it originally was grassland prairie, you don't have to do a thing to your soil to grow good grass. But if you live in the eastern part of the country, you have to add limestone to sweeten the soil. If you live in the western part of the country where the soil is alkaline, then you would add sulfur. It's about as cheap as anything that you could add. A half a pound of sulfur to 100 square feet of ground is enough. 3.5 to 5 pounds of limestone to 100 square feet of ground if you live in the east. Get that on the ground. Now, I have here in this spreader just some ordinary ground limestone. I like to use dolomite limestone. It has some magnesium in it as well. But you can see we simply put it on the first rain or the first irrigation, and that whiteness will all disappear. Now, if you want grass to grow, you've got to give grass nitrogen. And I have here a typical good grass fertilizer. And you can see what that percentage is. The first figure on every label on fertilizer means nitrogen. High nitrogen is what makes grass grow, 26-3-3. That's not the only formula, but a good lawn fertilizer does have a big first number. And that you remember. This we'll also put in our spreader and get this across the lawn. Follow the directions. Don't make it any stronger than what the directions call for. Well, now let's go over here for a minute and we'll talk about soil preparation. I do want to linger here long enough for you to take a peek into my cold frame and see some of the seedlings that we have coming along. Beautiful plants of petunias and cabbages of various kinds coming around in the cold frames, and we'll be setting those. Some of those will be going out into the garden today. Now let's talk about soil preparation, because it's the most important thing that you can possibly do for your garden, more important than anything else. But the soil itself is not the most important thing. When I talk about soil preparation, it is the amount of sunshine that soil gets. If you can't have a good 6 hours of sunshine every day, then try growing some wildflowers, because you won't be able to grow very good vegetables. When I get questions that say my radishes were all tall and got all tops and no bottoms, I know why. There just wasn't enough sunshine. The other thing is we look for drainage. Soil which will hold puddles for a couple of hours after a rain needs something done to allow the moisture to go through that soil. In our situation, we began by raising the beds. The soil dries out quickly. We have early crops. It's easy cultivation. But when it gets to be midsummer, we do have to irrigate. Now let's talk about the soil. Any soil will do. And that is something that you must bear in mind. I don't care what kind of soil. This garden right here was the town dump, and it was a parking lot. And the first year, by adding these secret ingredients, which is nothing but organic matter, we picked $700 worth of vegetables out of a piece of ground only 40 feet square. So the secret ingredient is organic matter. It will lighten the heavy soils to allow the air and the moisture to get in and out. And on the light soils, it will fill them up so the moisture and the fertilizer stay with it. Now this can be in any kind of a form. The easiest thing that you can get is ordinary sphagnum peat moss. Now this is available at any garden center anywhere in the country. If you have not gardened in your soil before, put this moss on 3 inches deep and dig it in. Another thing, which you're a good gardener, we'd have some compost. This is just old decayed leaves and such as this. Now this is the thing which a lot of gardeners can't find. This is some well-decayed, old, rotten cow manure. Any kind of animal manure is also good. You can use leaves, grass clippings, rotten sawdust. Now I talked about the acidity, alkalinity balance of limestone and sulfur on lawns. You do the same thing exactly in your garden. You can send away and get a little test kit like this with a simple little reagents in it. A 7-year-old child can make one of these tests and tell you just what you need to add to the soil, to the way of fertilizer. Now you notice I haven't mentioned fertilizer because the fertilizer goes on just before planting, not now. Now, after we've made the test, then we have to check over to see whether the soil is ready for digging. And that is, we want to check the moisture content of the soil. Now, the easiest way that I know to check the moisture content is to just take a handful like this and squeeze it. Now, if you get water dripping out the bottom, you know it's too wet. If it falls apart on you, you know it's too dry. But when you go like this and it separates in your hands, you know that soil is ready for digging. Now, one way to dig is by hand. You've seen me do this before, I'm sure. I like to use a spading fork, if possible, and give it a crack to loosen that soil. But at my own home, what I use is a tiller. And it certainly takes the toil out of digging in a garden. And let me show you this one. Now this particular tiller has the tines in the back. And you will see one of the advantages of this. Now what you saw me do was to till the soil, but I didn't tell you ahead of time that I was tilling in this winter ryegrass, which we planted last September. And now you see the grass is 7 or 8 inches tall, but after the tiller goes through it, it's all ground up into the soil, making it a really beautiful organic ingredient for your soil. Now let's go over here and we'll plant some cabbage plants. I want to talk about cabbages in one vein only to begin with, that all cabbage crops are susceptible to the cabbage root maggot. Now the cabbage root maggot doesn't crawl into your garden, it flies in as a fly. The fly lays the eggs at the base of the cabbage plant. They hatch and go down and eat up the root. Now there are 2 ways of controlling it. First of all, if you don't do a thing, you're going to lose maybe half of your cabbage crop. Usually some people lose as much as 80% of their cabbages. 2 methods, one chemical, one non-chemical. The first thing we did, line out the row here, using my planting board and spacing the cabbage plants about 18 inches apart. This is a little variety called Market Victor. We'll set the cabbage in just like this. That's all there is to that. I'm going to put a collar around it to keep out the cutworms. And then a little saucer here to hold moisture. Now the chemical treatment that I'm going to use is called diazinon. I have diazinon mixed with water, and all I'm going to do here is to pour some of this fluid in around, and that will control the cabbage maggot. When they arrive, they will eat in that soil and die. Now let's slip in another cabbage plant here, using that same method. Very simple idea. When the plants are in 6-packs like that, set them in like so, firm them down gently, put a collar around them like this, little something to keep out of a little saucer to keep the moisture from getting away. We'll pour a little diazinon down around them. All right, now that will take care of that method, but we have a space between these plants of about 18 inches. Well, I'm a frugal, as they say, New England gardener. I want to get as many crops out of this garden as I can in this first year. So I'm going to set a little lettuce seedling in between the cabbages. Now notice that when I put that lettuce in the ground, when I put that little lettuce in the ground, I did not bury it. I set the lettuce so that it was growing at just about the same depth at which it grew before. Simply firm it down like that. Now we're going to give all of these plants a drink of water with some nutrients in it. Now this is simply what we call a starter solution. It has a liquid fertilizer mixed in with water, just as simple as that. Now we come to the non-chemical method. On the non-chemical method, this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to surround, see I have a piece of material. This is actually the kind of stuff that you put underneath the carpet to make the carpet feel a little softer. What we'll do here is to plant our little plant, slip this around it, and we will keep those cabbage root maggots away physically, just like that. We'll take this little mat, slip it around here, slip it right up to the center, pull that together. We'll use a little bit of tape to seal it. It's going to be a pretty smart fly that can get in between that. And so this plant will grow on. The flies won't be able to lay their eggs at the base. We'll follow down this row, alternating our lettuce and our cabbage plants. But it's also time to plant peas. And I have 2 or 3 good suggestions on planting peas. The first one is I like to plant them in a wide row. I remember some seedsman out in the West and said in his catalog, if you want to get a lot of peas, put a lot of peas in your ground and don't be stingy. That was his word, and I certainly agree with him. Now these pea seeds are pink in color, whether you can quite tell it on your camera, on your television or not. They've been treated with a chemical called captan, which is a fungicide which keeps the pea seed from rotting in the ground when it's too cold. Well, I read in a catalog the other day that some company was saying that if you use captan-coated seeds, you can't use a legume inoculant, which helps them take nitrogen from the air. Well, you can use both. They said they're going to make their catalog a little bit more clear on this subject next year. The idea is you have to plant the seeds within a 6-hour period. Now this one is a legume inoculant. Allows these peas or beans to take free nitrogen right out of the atmosphere. So we dust some of this inoculant on the seeds, scatter them around a little bit, and then when you plant peas, this is all there is to it. They look black, you probably can't even see them. But I'm putting them in so that the peas themselves are no more than a couple of inches apart, right on down the row here. They'll come up just as thick as can be. They'll be partly self-supporting. We will use some brush eventually to hold them up, but we won't need all of that amount because there'll be enough peas, and we'll get a good crop of peas out of it too. Now, a wide trench, 6 or 8 inches wide. Cover these peas over now with about 2 inches of soil, just like that, and firm it down. If you want any kind of a seed to germinate, it has to be in firm contact with the soil. You notice that when I'm through planting, there is a difference in depth here. The soil is not up to the top of this trench. There's about 2 inches of difference. And when the peas start to grow, I'll pull more soil in from the sides, and so that we can end up with those roots buried down in the ground where it's good and cool. Well, now the next thing let's plant is some carrots and some radishes. And that might seem to you to be a strange combination to plant together, but let me explain. The carrot seeds take about 3 weeks to germinate, and it's been my experience that weeds take about 3 days to germinate. So this will be a whole patch of weeds weeks before the carrots are out of the ground. To mark the row, I mix some radish seeds along with the carrots in the row. The radishes will be up 4 or 5 days and mark the row. When the carrots are large enough to thin, the radish will be large enough to pull and eat. So this is all we have here. We're putting in a twin row about 6 or 8 inches apart. That's another way to get the maximum amount of production from a small garden. Just sowing the seeds in here. Get enough of them in. Seeds are rather inexpensive part of your garden. Now, carrot seeds should go in roughly a ½ inch deep. Mix in with your carrots some of these radishes. This is a lovely one called Cherry Bell. I don't need very many of those seeds, just enough to mark the row. And where we have them coming along, we'll have these up. We'll be eating these carrots within a month, but it'll be 2 or 3 months before we're picking we'll eat the radishes in a month. It'll be more than that before we ever get to the carrots. Now we'll cover those a ½ inch deep, pat them down, give them a good drink of water, and they'll be off to growing. We'll put double rows of those. Now we're going to grow a new type of spinach this year, an all-America winner called Melody. A nice name. Spinach seeds will go in about the same distance. You should put about a seed, 2 seeds every inch. Pretty good idea. Pretty hard to scatter them quite that evenly. Scatter them along, cover them over here with about a ½ inch of soil. Now, when you plant seeds at any time of the year, you must be sure that those seeds stay moist. And I mean moist. The day that they dry out is the day that they die. Most seeds have a wonderful power of germination. And the seedsman will say that the seeds have 95 or 75% germination, but they won't if you don't keep them moist during that critical period. Now we're going to plant some turnip, a variety from England this year called Golden Perfection. We tried it last year. It was very good. The maggots didn't seem to get to it as quickly as the others. Don't put them in too thickly, because almost every single turnip seed that you plant will grow. And so then we cover them roughly a ½ inch deep, water them down. Now with the turnips, which are a root crop, I am going to put a diazinon drench on the soil, because that's one of the ways that we're sure that the root maggot won't get to them. Now I said we're going to plant some beets and carrots, some beets and Swiss chard. All right, I am not going to plant them outdoors at this time. I want to go in the greenhouse and show you a way that we can get them off to a much quicker start. Now if you don't have a greenhouse, all you need is a cold frame, a hotbed, or even a windowsill. You know how the soil is out here in the spring. It's apt to be cold. We can get weeks of this dry, that wet, cold weather, and the seeds just lie there on the ground. They won't germinate. Beets also have a tendency, if it's too cold, to when they start to grow, they will send out flower stalks instead of round beets. So I'm going to start some beets indoors, and these beets will save every plant because it's one of the few root crops that can be transplanted. We'll sow them right in the top of here, keep them in where it's nice and warm. You know how when you plant beets in the garden, you often get 2 or 3, sometimes more than that, beets all come up in bunches. Well, this is the nature of most beets. What we'll do is save every one of these, because when they come up, we can separate them just as we would any kind of a seedling. Cover them over here, roughly a ½ inch deep. No problem here. We just level off the top of this little flat, this little flower pot. Give this a drink of water, and those beets will be up and growing in just a few days. When they're about 2 inches tall, we can put them right out in the garden. We'll have every one of these will make a nice beet. Now, the Swiss chard is the first cousin to the beet. The only thing is, it makes nice leaves and nothing under the ground. So with the Swiss chard, we'll do the same thing. You notice I'm using a smaller pot because I only want a couple of dozen Swiss chards, but I'd like a couple of hundred beets. Again, can't tell the seeds apart at this stage in the game. Cover them about a ½ inch deep. Keep them moist, and they'll be up and growing, and you can transplant them out into your garden. Now I'm going to come to my plant clinic. And the first plant I want to talk to you about is a pretty little thing at this time of year called the cineraria. Now, this is a lovely annual houseplant. And an annual grows from seeds, blossoms, and dies in the same year. Now, here's one which has gone by. Just about had it. All you can possibly do with this plant is to throw it away. Just throw it away, and next year you'll get another one. But now we'll come to another kind of a plant, which is an annual. This one is called the fairy primrose. This plant is not through blossoming, but it's certainly not too far from it. You see this nearly gone, but here's a nice flower bud coming. When the time comes that this plant has gone by, all the flowers have gone away, throw it away. It will have done its purpose, and we start with a new one. They're very, very inexpensive. But I have here another type of primrose. This is called the polyanthus primrose. Now, the polyanthus is a different creature entirely. This is a perennial. It will live for years and years and years in your garden. You can divide it, multiply it. It comes in yellow, almost white, cream-colored, many shades of red, right down to maroon, as well as every shade of pink, and as you can see over here, some of the richest purple that you could possibly imagine. Now, this is a fine, hardy perennial. When this type of plant has finished blossoming, we will divide it. You'll find down inside here several crowns of the plant which can be easily divided with a knife and plant them in your garden. They're hardy outdoors. They'll live, give them a shady place, and they'll do beautifully for years and years and years. Well, that takes care of our good plant clinic. Well, let's talk just a minute or two about some questions today. The first one, I guess I've already answered. It's from Louisville, Kentucky. I'd like to know your recommendations as how to get a garden plot with nice, loose, workable soil like yours in the Victory Garden program. Well, if you saw this first part of the program, you know organic matter is the secret. From Zanesville, Ohio, my cyclamen is finally through blossoming. What must I do to get this beautiful plant to flower again next year? Well, I brought in a little cyclamen here. This is one of the miniature cyclamens, rather a nice little plant. It's about halfway through its blossoming season. When its flowers finally fade, I will repot this into a slightly larger flower pot and put it outdoors in a shady place all summer long. Bring it in the house in the fall. One of my neighbors kept one for 8 years. Every summer it went outdoors underneath the grape arbor. They will live on and on and on. That's the cyclamen. It's also pronounced cyclamen, but I hate anything that sounds sick in my garden. From Utica, New York, could you please tell me what causes some raspberries to be undeveloped while the berries of a cane nearby are perfect? Yes, some of your plants are infected with a virus or some other type of an infectious disease. If I were you, I would just pull up all of those plants and plant a new bed of brand new plants that are certified. Be sure that you get disease-free certified raspberry plants from a nurseryman and plant them in another part of your garden where the roots will not have connected and there can be no possible communication. Now that virus, by the way, is carried by aphids and other flying insects, so I would get rid of one bed before I planted the next one. From New Jersey, Summit, New Jersey, can I use coffee grounds mixed into the soil to enrich the garden? Well, at the price of coffee, that's pretty expensive fertilizer, but it's good fertilizer. All the coffee grounds go on the compost pile at our house. From Murfreesboro, Illinois, what kind of results will I get if I use potatoes I raised last year as seed potatoes for this year? Well, that's a pretty good question. But let me tell you what the pros do. They buy, again, what is called certified seed potatoes. Absolutely disease-free, because that is the key to getting a good crop. Now, if you're certain that your potatoes are clean, they don't have scab on them, and there's no rotted tubers, they'll probably be all right. But if I were you, I'd be safe. Buy some new certified seed potatoes. I have from Parkersburg, West Virginia. Can holly trees be started from cuttings? You bet they can, very easily. Start them in the fall, just after the growth has matured, say in October. Take cuttings 4 to 6 inches long, root them in sand or a combination of sand and peat moss. It'll take 4 or 5 months for them to root, but they will do very, very nicely. Now, next week, we're going to plant tomatoes, and I have an interesting demonstration to tell you how to get them up out of the ground and growing very, very fast. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden, and I hope you enjoy the program every week.